If you need financing information, I can leave some brochures. That's all right. I already sent the wire this morning.
3. Charcoal.
What? No way! That's impossible!
Sir, I know. You want to know the worst part, Brett? It's not the money. It's that you'll do this again tomorrow and nobody will stop you. Cool. Look, I think maybe you misunderstood what these cars actually cost.
The laugh was still hanging in the cold, conditioned air of the showroom when the salesman's phone started to buzz against his chest. He almost didn't check it. He was too busy enjoying the moment, too pleased with the way his little joke had landed, the way his coworker had grinned back at him across the polished floor. But the phone kept buzzing, insistent and out of habit. More than anything, he slid it out of his jacket and glanced down. He read the screen once. He read it again, slower. And whatever expression had been living on his face a second ago, that easy, superior smile, it drained away like water going down a sink. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Across the showroom, the man in the dusty work boots hadn't moved an inch. He was still standing there by the red car, calm as still water, watching the salesman with a pair of pale eyes that gave away absolutely nothing. And the room for one long second went completely silent. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Because to understand why a grown man went white as chalk in the middle of the most expensive floor in Orange County, you have to go back about 2 hours. You have to start with the boots. If you're new here, welcome. This channel tells stories that stay with you long after they're over. So stay with me because you are going to want to see how this one ends. Now, the boots. It was a Wednesday morning in the middle of July, and the sun was coming down hard on the Pacific Coast Highway when a blue Ford pickup, the kind of truck that has been used for actual work, pulled into a lot that charged $14 an hour to park. The truck was a few years old. There was a hairline crack running across the bottom of the windshield and a coat of pale dust on the wheel, wells that no car wash had touched in a while. The man who climbed out of it was somewhere north of 50, lean, quiet in the way he moved. He wore a gray flannel shirt gone soft from too many washes, jeans that faded at the knees, and a pair of work boots the color of dried mud, because that was exactly what they were coated in. He'd come straight off a site out past the desert that morning, and he hadn't bothered to change. He didn't wear a watch. He didn't carry a bag. He stood in the lot for a moment, thumbing through something on an old phone with a cracked screen, and then he slipped it into his back pocket and walked toward the glass. The dealership sat on the corner like it had been dropped there by people who wanted you to feel small. Floor-to-ceiling windows, Italian tile, a sign out front in letters so clean and so expensive they didn't need to shout. Inside, 4 cars sat under spotlights on a floor so polished it threw the light back up at the ceiling. This was a place where the cheapest thing on the floor cost more than most people would earn in 5 years. The glass doors slid open. A wall of chilled air rolled out, smelling of leather and money. Nobody came to say hello. A young woman behind the front desk glanced up, took him in, and looked back down at her keyboard. A second salesman was on the phone, turned away, and in a glass-walled office toward the back, a woman in her 40s sat with her eyes fixed on a laptop screen, and if she noticed the man come in at all, she gave no sign of it. The man in the boots didn't seem to mind. He walked straight to the black car parked in the center of the floor, crouched down beside it, and looked at the stitching on the seats. That was when Brett Coleman decided to size him up. Brett was 32 years old, and he was very good at exactly one thing, which was reading a customer in under 3 seconds. Or at least he thought he was good at it. He wore a navy suit that fit him well enough, a tie clipped down with a little silver bar, and a watch on his wrist that looked, from across a room, like something it was not. Last year, Brett had cleared a lot of money on this floor. This year had been slower, much slower, and a man who is scared of slipping is a dangerous kind of man, because he starts looking for people he can feel bigger than. Brett looked at the boots. He looked at the faded jeans, the soft flannel, the bare wrist. He looked, and But decisions like that still have to wear a smile, so he walked over. Morning. His voice was pleasant. It was the exact pleasant voice a man uses to ask a delivery driver whether he's got the right address. Something I can help you find. The man in the boots didn't stand up right away. This one, he said. The Stradale, I want to see the Daytona interior. Brett let a small pause happen. That model starts around 507,000, before you add anything to it. I know. And there's a wait list. New orders are running 14, 18 months out right now. He said it the way you'd tell a kid the toy is too expensive, kindly, but with the door already halfway closed. I know that too, the man said. And here is where it started to turn, not with cruelty. Brett wasn't cruel, not exactly, and that somehow made it worse. He just kept talking to the man like he was doing him a favor by talking to him at all. Have you actually sat in one of these before? Because I always tell people the experience in person is a whole different thing from the brochure. There was a patience in his tone now. The special patience people save for explaining something simple to someone they've decided is simple. The man in the boots ran a thumb along the seam of the leather. This stitching, is that the charcoal or the cognac? Charcoal, Brett said. Correct answer. But he let a small breath out through his nose while he said it, a little sigh he thought no one could hear. The young woman at the front desk heard it. Her name was Emma. She'd been working here 4 months, and she was still young enough to feel things she didn't yet have the nerve to say out loud. Right about then, the doors slid open again, and a different kind of customer walked in. Older, silver hair, a linen jacket of fresh cream, and a real watch, an unmistakable one, catching the light. And Brett Coleman changed. You could see it happen, like a switch flipping under his skin. He straightened up. His smile grew about 40% wider. He turned his whole body away from the man in the boots. Mr. Ashford, he called out, warm as sunshine. Your GTB cleared customs. I got the update this morning. I was going to call you. Mr. Ashford stopped. He looked at Brett. Then he looked for a second at the man crouched by the black car who'd just been left there mid-sentence. Something crossed the older man's face. It wasn't quite disapproval. It was more like a man noticing a small ugliness and deciding it wasn't his to clean up. He followed Brett off toward a private consultation room. And the man in the dusty boots stood alone in the middle of that showroom for 4 minutes and 22 seconds. Nobody came. He straightened up eventually and put his hands in his pockets, and he just looked at the black car, calm, unhurried, like a man who had all the time in the world and had learned, a long time ago, not to waste any of it being upset by small people. When Brett came back out, it was because Mr. Ashford had only stopped in to pick up paperwork. Brett drifted to the counter, opened his laptop, and started typing something, and he glanced over at the man by the car the way you glance at a chore you haven't gotten to yet. So look, Brett said, not really looking up. If you want to sit in one, I'd need to get some contact information from you, and we'd set up an appointment, and I don't need to test drive it. Okay. Brett almost smiled again. So then you're saying you want to buy one? Listen to the way he asked it. Not you'd like to place an order. No. He said, you want to buy one, the way you'd ask a man if he was sure he could afford the check. Like the answer was harder to believe than the question. 3 of them, the man said. The typing stopped. For a second, Brett Coleman just stared at him, and then he did the thing he would spend a long, long time wishing he could take back. He turned his head toward the other salesman, a guy named Greg standing maybe 8 steps away, and he said it loud enough for the whole floor to hear. Hey, Greg, this gentleman here wants to buy 3 Stradales. And he laughed. It wasn't a big laugh. It was worse than that. It was a small, private laugh through the nose, the kind that doesn't need to be explained because it explains itself. Greg looked over. He looked the man in the boots up and down, dirty boots to soft flannel to bare wrist, and then he looked away again, back to his own screen, and he smiled too. At the front desk, Emma looked down at her keyboard. In the glass office at the back, the sales manager, a woman named Carol Whitfield, stopped typing. She looked out through the glass. She looked long enough to see it, all of it. The laugh and the man's still face and the 2 salesmen sharing a joke at his expense. And then she turned back to her screen. She had 2 kids and a mortgage in a nice part of town, and Brett Coleman put up 40% of the numbers on that floor. So Carol Whitfield turned back to her screen. That was her choice, not stupidity, not blindness. A choice. Remember that because it's going to matter. The man in the boots watched Brett laugh, and he didn't say anything. He didn't get angry. He didn't raise his voice. He just waited for it to be over, the way you wait for weather to pass. I'm sorry, Brett said, wiping the grin off, mostly. It's just 3 at once. That's a pretty unusual order. We'd usually need to verify some things financially before 4 weeks. The wire went out at 7:23 this morning, the man said. Brett blinked. Confirmation's already in your system. Ironwood-FNA-this year-0714. Pull it up. Now, Brett Coleman still didn't believe it. Of course he didn't. But you humor a man like this, you pull up the screen and you show him the empty page and you send him on his way. So Brett typed. He hit enter. And that's when his phone started to buzz against his chest. You already know what he saw, but let me tell you what it actually said, there on the little screen glowing up at him in the cold air. Wire transfer confirmed, $1,287,000, paid in full, 3 straddles, and the name of the account it came from a company name, and under that a personal name attached to the transfer. Brett read it once, he read it again, slower, and every drop of color drained out of his face. Because the name on that wire was a name that, 6 months ago, had been in every business paper in the country. It was the name of the man who had just signed a $4.2 billion clean energy contract with the federal government, the largest of its kind that year. There had been a photo of him at the signing, though nobody who saw that photo would have connected it to the tired man in the dusty boots. Because in the photo, he'd been in a plain dark suit, half turned away from the cameras, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. The founder, the majority owner, the whole thing his. His name was Cillian Murphy. And he had ordered 3 of these cars from his phone at 7 that morning, sitting in the cab of a beat-up Ford outside a solar site in the desert, before he ever set foot in this building. He hadn't come here to be sold anything. He'd come to look at the stitching, charcoal, or cognac under real light, because that was the one thing you couldn't judge from a screen. Brett looked up, his mouth was open. Nothing was coming out. Cillian Murphy looked back at him, calm as ever, and said, "So, charcoal or cognac? I need to see it in this light before I confirm it for 3 people. 3 people, Brett managed. I'm not keeping any of them. The whole floor was quiet now. Emma had stopped even pretending to work. Greg had gone very still, and in the glass office at the back, Carol Whitfield was already on her feet. She came out fast, but not so fast that it looked like panic. She'd been doing this a long time. She read the screen over Brett's shoulder in about a second and a half, and then she did the only thing left to do, which was walk straight toward the man she should have walked toward 20 minutes ago. "Mr. Murphy," her voice was smooth as the floor. "I'm Carol Whitfield. I'm the sales manager here. I want to apologize for the wait. We are absolutely thrilled to take care of you today." Cillian looked at her for one beat. "I wasn't waiting," he said. "I was watching." Carol's smile didn't crack, but something behind her eyes did. She was a professional. She recovered. She shot Brett a look, one quick glance between 2 people who'd worked together a long time, no words needed. Just a whole conversation in half a second, and then she turned back to Cillian. "Brett will walk you through every interior option we have. We've got a private room with better natural light for judging the leather." "Right here's fine." She stopped. Brett stood beside her, both hands sinking into his pockets, staring down at his laptop with the focus of a man who couldn't think of anywhere else to put his eyes. His face had gone back to that flat, professional blank, but there was something in the muscle of his jaw, something tight and small, that said he knew exactly what he had done, and he was just waiting to find out what it was going to cost. Cillian didn't waste any more words on either of them. "Charcoal Daytona," he said. "I need to see this one under the lights in this room, not some other room." Then he added quietly, "One of the 3 people it's for is going to need more room on the passenger side. His hand isn't all there anymore. I need to know if the Daytona seat changes the way the door armrest sits." Carol looked at him a moment, and you could see her understanding shift, not the whole story, not yet, but enough to know that this man wasn't buying these cars to show anybody anything. "Let me get one of our technicians," she said. "He can explain it to you directly." "Thank you." Brett Coleman was still standing there. Nobody invited him into the rest of the conversation. The technician's name was Walter Pruitt, and he was 58 years old, and he had been turning wrenches in the back of this building for 14 years. He came out from the shop wiping grease off his hands with a blue rag, and he looked at Cillian, boots and jeans and all, and not one single thing changed in his eyes. He just nodded a hello and started talking about the seat mounts in the voice of a man who genuinely loves what he does. Those next 20 minutes were the best part of the whole morning, because Walter didn't care what Cillian was wearing. He crouched down by the car and showed him exactly how the armrest sat, exactly how the seat rails shifted with the Daytona package, exactly where a man with a damaged hand would find his grip. And Cillian Murphy, who had said maybe 40 words since he walked in, asked Walter real questions and listened to every answer. How that was happening, Brett Coleman stood at his own counter and looked over no more than 3 times. Greg didn't say anything at all. Carol stayed near the conversation, but she didn't dare step into it. And Emma, the young woman from the front desk, quietly filled a glass of water and set it down on the counter near Cillian without a word. He looked down at the water, then he looked up at her. She turned away fast, her face gone pink. He picked up the glass and took a sip. When Walter finished, Cillian nodded once. Charcoal, he said, for all 3. And then he did something he hadn't done all morning. He offered something no one had asked him for. Maybe it was the way old Walter had treated him like a person. Maybe he just decided somebody in that room ought to hear it. He looked at the 3 faces on his cracked phone screen and he said, "The first one, Ray. He lost 2 fingers on the first site I ever built. Contractor's insurance found a way not to pay, so I paid. He wouldn't take a dime past the hospital bills. Told me he didn't need anything else." A pause. 4 years later, I still think about that, about a man who wouldn't take a dime. Nobody in that showroom said anything. The second one, Ruth. She was smarter about money than I ever was from the first day. A partner of mine ran her out so he could put his own nephew in her chair. She fought it 3 years in court. She won, and it hollowed her out, and now she teaches accounting at a community college for about $4,000 a month. He turned the phone a little in his hand. She deserves one morning where she doesn't have to worry about a single thing. He looked at the third face longest. The third one, Earl. He ran security at my offices for 11 years. Heart gave out, so he retired early on a pension that doesn't cover much. Cillian was quiet a second. His wife got diagnosed last month, Parkinson's. He doesn't know I know. I only found out because a nurse at the hospital called my number by mistake instead of his. Our old numbers are still crossed in system somewhere. He slid the phone into his pocket. I don't want that man worrying about anything except being sex to Helen. He didn't ask anyone to feel anything about that. He just said it plain and let it sit there in the cold air. And it did sit there. Carol Whitfield was looking at the floor. Walter had stopped wiping his hands. Even Greg, over at his counter, had his eyes down. Then Carol Whitfield turned and walked back to her office and closed the door. Through the glass, Brett watched her sit down. She didn't open her laptop right away. She just stared at the wall in front of her for the better part of 4 minutes. And then she opened it, and she started to type something long. Brett didn't know who that email was going to. He'd find out the following Monday. But before Monday, there was one more thing. While Walter was finishing the paperwork on the order, Emma Bishop walked into Carol's office, shut the door quietly behind her, and set her phone on the desk with the screen already glowing. "I recorded it," she said, from the second he laughed. Carol looked at her. She looked at the phone. She looked back at Emma. And Emma didn't shake. She stood up straight with the straight back of a person who has already decided and doesn't want to be talked out of it. "This isn't the first time," she said. "In March, there was a man who came in wearing regular clothes, spoke with an accent, and Brett treated him exactly like this. In May, a woman came in asking about a used one. And Brett had me go tell her it was sold. I'd seen it on the system myself. There were 2 of them sitting right there. Emma, I want it on the record, with Mr. Murphy or without him, I don't care which." Carol Whitfield looked at that young woman for a long moment. She was a good manager, in most of the ways that mattered. But she'd also known Brett Coleman since he started, and she knew deep down that every word coming out of this girl's mouth was true. She'd known it for months. She'd just found reasons not to. She reached out and picked up the phone, and she forwarded that recording to the corporate office herself. Now, there was one more piece of this morning, and it was the one that mattered most. Cillian Murphy was sitting at a desk signing the last of the option sheets when Brett Coleman finally came over. He'd been rehearsing the words in his head for 10 minutes. "Mr. Murphy, I want to apologize for the misunderstanding earlier. Sometimes in this business we—" "There wasn't a misunderstanding," Cillian said. Brett stopped. "You saw my boots and you decided." Cillian kept signing, his handwriting small and quick and plain, no flourish to it. "There was nothing you misread. You knew exactly what you were doing." He set the pen down. "And that's got nothing to do with me. I got my cars." Brett opened his mouth. What it has to do with, Cillian said, and now he looked up, and those pale eyes landed on Brett Coleman and stayed there, is this. The room got very still. I regret isn't what you did to me. His voice didn't rise, it didn't have to. It's that you'll do it again tomorrow, to someone who has no way to make you stop. Brett didn't move. Somebody's going to walk in here next week wearing boots just like mine. Only they won't have a wire in your system. They won't have a name you recognize. They'll just be a person who saved up their whole life. For one look at a car they'll never own, and you'll do to them exactly what you did to me, and they'll walk back out that door, and you will never once know what you took from them. He stood up and gathered his papers. You didn't get caught being a bad salesman today, Cillian said. You got caught being the same man you're going to be tomorrow. That's the part you should be scared of, not me. And then he walked out. He didn't slam the door, he didn't look back. The glass slid shut behind him, and through it you could see him cross the lot to the dusty blue Ford, get in, and drive away into the Wednesday traffic like the whole thing had never happened. Brett Coleman stood in the middle of the showroom floor. There was no right thing to say. Not because he wasn't clever enough to find it, but because, for the first time in a very long time, he was hearing something he had no way to argue with. His face didn't show regret, not exactly. It showed something closer to regret's ugly cousin. It showed a man who was sorry he'd been hurt. At the front desk, Emma Bishop stood up straight and looked right at him. For the first time in 4 months, she didn't look down. Now, here's what happened after. Because a story like this doesn't end when the door slides shut. It ends in the weeks that come after, in the quiet places where nobody's watching. That Monday, Brett Coleman was called into a meeting he did not walk back out of with his job. The recording, Emma's account, Carol Whitfield's own written report, it was all there. Corporate didn't make a show of it. There was no announcement. It was just that on Tuesday morning, Brett Coleman's desk was empty, and by the end of the week, somebody else's nameplate was on it. He tried to land at another dealership across town. The manager there had heard the story, everyone in that small world had heard it by then, and the interview was short. He ended up selling used sedans off a lot near the freeway, 40 minutes inland, where nobody's wearing linen and nobody's checking their watch. And here's the thing the man never quite recovered from. It wasn't losing the fancy floor. It was that every single time now when somebody walked onto his lot in dirty boots, his stomach dropped. Every time. Because he finally understood he could never again be sure who he was looking at. He'd wanted to be the kind of man who could tell at a glance. And he'd been taught in the most expensive way possible that no one can, that the whole game he'd been so proud of playing had never made any sense at all. That, in the end, was the punishment, not the empty desk. The doubt he'd carry into every conversation for the rest of his working life. The knowledge that he'd never really known who anyone was, and that he'd hurt people who walked away and never came back, and that he would never even be able to count them. Carol Whitfield kept her job, but something in her had shifted, and she knew it, and she didn't try to unshift it. She'd sat in that glass office and watched a man get laughed at, and she'd turned back to her screen because it was easier. She promoted Emma Bishop to senior associate in September. She started walking the floor herself, and when new hires came on, she told them a version of the story, no names, just the shape of it, because she'd decided that the least she could do with what she'd seen was make sure the next Emma didn't have to be the only one brave enough to hit record. Emma didn't celebrate the promotion. She just came in every day, made her coffee, opened her computer, and got to work. That was all she'd ever wanted, to work somewhere she didn't have to look down. And the 3 cars. They were delivered in October. There was no event, no photographer, no long letter explaining anything. Just the keys and the registration in each person's own name and a single line written by hand in blue ink on a plain card. Thank you for the things you did that I never found the right way to thank you for. No signature. It didn't need one. Ray Dawson got the call on a Friday afternoon while he was driving the number 47 bus down the coast road. He pulled over at the next stop, opened the door for a woman with a bag of groceries, and then he sat there gripping the wheel with a hand that was missing 2 fingers, and he looked out the windshield at the ocean for a long, long time. The woman with the groceries asked if he was all right. He said he was fine. His voice said he was anything but. Ruth Callahan got the email at 6:47 in the morning, before her first class. She read it once. Then she closed the laptop, walked to the window of the faculty room, and looked down at the students drinking coffee in the early sun. She stood there for 7 minutes. Then she went in and taught her lesson on corporate cash flow in the same flat, steady voice as every other day. And not one person in that room knew a single thing had changed. Only she knew. Earl Jennings got the news in the evening after he'd brought Helen home from her physical therapy. He read the message standing in the kitchen with his hand flat on the cold counter. Then he walked into the living room where Helen was watching her show, and he sat down next to her and took her hand. She looked over. "What is it?" "Nothing," he said. "Just wanted to sit next to you a while." She nodded and turned back to the television, and he didn't let go of her hand. There's a last thing. Early one November morning, before the sun was properly up, a dusty blue Ford was parked at a turnout high above the city, where the road looks down over the whole valley while it's still soft and blue with the last of the dark. Cillian Murphy sat in the cab with a cup of gas station coffee gone cold in his hand, watching the streetlights blink out one by one as the light came up slow from the east. He wasn't thinking about the cars. He wasn't thinking about Brett Coleman or The Wire or the $1.2 million or any of it. He was thinking about a hand with 2 fingers missing, resting quiet on the wheel of a city bus, and the way an old friend had once looked out a window at the ocean like he'd just remembered something good he thought he'd lost. Cillian took the last sip of the coffee. The sky went pale gold along the ridgeline. He started the truck, and he went to work. If this story reminded you of someone who did the quiet thing, the thing nobody thanked them for, do me a favor. Say their name down in the comments. Sometimes seeing your name written down is the whole thing. Sometimes that's enough. Subscribe if you want more stories that stay with you, and I'll see you in the next one.